The cold was the first thing she noticed. Not the biting chill of a winter morning, but the deep, indifferent cold of a cheap motel room whose heating unit had given up hours ago. It seeped through her thin blanket, through her worn sweater, and settled deep in her bones. The second thing she noticed was the paper. A single sheet, folded and wedged between the door and its frame. An eviction notice. Its crisp, official edges seemed impossibly sharp in the gray pre-dawn light. Her name, Maya Evans, was printed in stark, impersonal letters. Final notice. Vacate by 11. 0 a.m. A dry, ragged sound, half sob and half laugh, escaped her lips. 11 a.m. She had 3 hours to pack the entirety of her life, which now consisted of a backpack of clothes, a half-empty tube of toothpaste, and a crushing weight of debt that felt heavier than any physical object. Her eyes drifted to the window, to the empty, oil-stained parking space just outside her door. The spot where the wanderer was supposed to be. The spot where her home was supposed to be. What is the true cost of doing the right thing? For 28-year-old Maya Evans, the question was no longer a philosophical exercise. The answer wasn't a number. It was the bone-deep cold in a motel room she was being thrown out of. It was the phantom limb ache for a steering wheel that was no longer hers to hold. It was everything. This empty space, at the Sunset Vista Motel off Highway 99, is where her life came undone. And it all began with an act of selfless courage. Before she became a cautionary tale whispered on police scanners and a viral headline twisted for outrage clicks, Maya Evans was an artist. And her canvas, her home, and her heart was a 1998 Ford Econoline van named The Wanderer. 2 weeks earlier, the world was painted in color. Under a brilliant California sun, Maya stood on a small stepladder, adding the final feather detail to a magnificent mural of a red-tailed hawk on the side of her van. The Wanderer wasn't just a vehicle, it was a testament to her spirit. She had bought it for $2,000, a rust bucket with a sputtering engine, and poured her soul into it. Inside, she had built a compact life. A narrow bed was covered in quilts she had woven herself, in patterns of sunsets and forests. A tiny kitchenette, with a single-burner stove and a miniature sink, was meticulously organized. Every inch of wall space was a mosaic of her passions, shelves for her art supplies, racks for the handmade silver and turquoise jewelry she sold, and hooks for her well-worn hiking boots. It smelled perpetually of turpentine, dried lavender, and the faint, sweet scent of adventure. Her life was a curated existence on the edge of solvency. She moved with the seasons, following craft fairs, farmers' markets, and the pull of the open road. Her profits were meager, most of it funneled into gas, food, and a glass jar on the dashboard labeled Engine Fund. The jar was barely a quarter full. She was happy, but it was a fragile happiness, one that required constant motion to maintain its balance. Taped to the dashboard, just above the engine fund, was a faded photograph. A young man with Maya's bright eyes and easy smile stood proudly in his army uniform, the jungles of Vietnam, a blurry green backdrop. Her grandfather, Sergeant Michael Evans. He had gifted her his love for the road, his resilience, and a single piece of advice that she had adopted as her life's motto. You don't wait to be asked, kid. When someone needs help, you just do. He was her North Star, the silent co-pilot on every journey. She was on her way to one of those craft fairs, humming along to a folk song on the radio, when the world ahead of her tore itself apart. The highway was a lonely ribbon of asphalt winding through the sun-baked foothills of the Sierra Nevadas. It was a place of quiet beauty, where the silence was broken only by the wind and the drone of an engine. Then, that silence was murdered. An explosive bang ripped through the air, loud enough to make Maya jump in her seat. Ahead of her, a large commercial truck, the kind that hauls produce from the Central Valley, wobbled violently. Its front right tire had blown. The driver fought for control, but the tonnage behind him had its own terrible momentum. The truck swerved, its trailer whipping around in a horrifying arc and jackknifed across both lanes. A Ford F-150 coming the other way had no time to react. The sound that followed was not something Maya would ever forget. It was a deafening, metallic scream of shearing, twisting steel, a sound of pure destruction that seemed to go on forever. The pickup truck was swatted aside like a toy, flipping onto its roof before sliding into a ditch. The big rig ground to a halt, a mangled behemoth blocking the entire road. Maya's reactions were pure instinct. She slammed on the brakes of the Wanderer, the tires screeching as she skidded to a stop a safe distance away. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The folk song on the radio was gone, replaced by the hiss of a ruptured radiator and the frantic, metallic ticking of engines cooling in the sudden, shocking silence. The air, moments before clean and warm, was now thick with the acrid stench of burnt rubber, gasoline, and something else, something coppery and terrifying. She fumbled for her phone. One bar, the call to 911 connected, but the voice on the other end was distant, tinny, and stressed. "Ma'am, we have multiple reports. The location is remote. We're dispatching units, but ETA for an ambulance is, it could be over an hour. Can you tell me if there are injuries?" An hour. Maya looked at the mangled pickup, upside down in the ditch. An hour felt like an eternity. Grabbing the small first aid kit she kept under her seat, she got out of the van. The asphalt was hot through the soles of her boots. A few other cars had stopped. A man in a business suit was pacing and shouting into his phone. A young couple stood by their car, filming the scene. Ignoring them, Maya scrambled down the gravelly incline towards the pickup. The driver's side was crushed, but the passenger door hung ajar. Inside, a man was hanging upside down, held by his seatbelt. He was unconscious, his face ashen. A dark, terrifyingly large pool of blood was forming on the truck's ceiling beneath his head, and his leg was bent at an angle that defied nature, the fabric of his jeans shredded and soaked in crimson. A nervous-looking man in a polo shirt, who introduced himself as Gary, had followed her down. "We shouldn't move him," he stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "I heard you're not supposed to move them. The paramedics on the phone said not to." Maya knew the rule. Don't move the victim. Wait for the professionals. But her grandfather's voice was a clear, steady counterpoint to Gary's frantic warnings. "You just do." She could see the faint, thready pulse in the man's neck, a frantic, failing rhythm. The blood loss was too severe. Waiting wasn't a choice, it was a death sentence. "He'll bleed out before they get here," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We have to get him out, now." With Gary's reluctant help, they managed to release the seatbelt and carefully, agonizingly, maneuver the unconscious man out of the shattered vehicle. He was a dead weight, heavy with muscle and helplessness. They laid him on the sun-scorched gravel, and Maya ripped open her first aid kit. The gauze pads were comically small, instantly soaked through when she tried to apply pressure to his leg. She looked up, her eyes scanning for a solution. And then she saw it. Standing on the shoulder of the road, her beautiful, painted home. The Wanderer. "My van," she said, the decision forming and solidifying in an instant. "Put him in my van." Gary stared at her as if she were insane. "Maya, the blood. It'll ruin everything." She looked from the dying man to her pristine van. The handmade quilts, the clean floor, the little world she had built with her own two hands. Then she looked back at the man's pale face. "It's just a van," she said, the words tasting like truth and sacrifice. "This is a person." They carried him up the embankment. Opening the side door, the familiar scent of lavender and turpentine washed over her, a smell of home that was about to be violated. They laid him on her bed, on the quilt patterned with a vibrant sunset. The crimson bloomed instantly across the orange and purple threads, a stark and brutal stain. The sight of it was a physical blow, but she pushed the feeling down. She jumped into the driver's seat, her hands trembling but her grip on the wheel firm. She yelled to Gary, "Tell the police I'm going to Mercy General in Stockton. It's the closest trauma center." Without a second glance at the chaos she was leaving behind, Maya floored the accelerator. The Wanderer lurched forward, its old engine groaning in protest before finding its rhythm. She drove with a singular, desperate focus, save the life bleeding out in her rearview mirror. She had no idea she was also driving away from her own life, leaving it wrecked on the side of Highway 99. The emergency bay at Mercy General Hospital was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. As Maya pulled up, laying on the horn, a team of scrubs-clad figures swarmed the Wanderer. Doors were wrenched open, a gurney materialized, and the unconscious man was expertly lifted out and whisked away through the automatic doors. It happened so fast, Maya was left standing in the exhaust fumes, breathless, her heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her clothes were stiffening with drying blood. A passing nurse gave her a fleeting, compassionate look, touched her arm and said, "You did a good thing," before she too was swallowed by the hospital's maw. It was the last kind word Maya would hear for a very long time. She was leaning against the side of her van, trying to catch her breath, when a California Highway Patrol cruiser pulled up. A trooper stepped out. He was tall, with a sun-weathered face and a visible air of exhaustion. His name tag read Miller. He wasn't there to thank her. He was there to do his job. "Ma'am, are you the driver of this vehicle?" he asked, his tone flat, devoid of emotion. "Yes. Two brought the man from the accident on Highway 99, Maya stammered, expecting relief, maybe even praise. Officer Miller sighed, a long, weary sound that made it clear she was an inconvenience. He pulled out a notepad and a pen, the click echoing in the sudden silence. "Ma'am, do you have any idea what you've done? You departed the scene of a major traffic collision. You interfered with an active investigation by moving a victim. You contaminated the scene. I don't care what your intentions were, you broke several sections of the vehicle code." Maya stared at him, bewildered. But he was dying. The ambulance was an hour away. "That's for medical professionals to determine, not you," Miller said, his voice laced with the condescending patience of someone explaining a simple concept to a difficult child. "You created a mess. We had no idea where the victim was, his identity, or the circumstances of his removal. You complicated everything." He scribbled on his pad. The tearing sound of the paper was viciously loud. He handed her 2 slips of paper. One was a citation for leaving the scene of an accident. The other, for improper transportation of an injured person. "You'll be hearing from the court?" he said, before turning his back on her to speak into his radio, already moving on to the next piece of paperwork in his long day. The citations felt cold and sharp in her trembling hand. Her good deed had been officially recorded as a legal infraction. The first wall of a bureaucratic fortress had just been erected in front of her. Dazed, she was told by a security guard that she couldn't leave her van in the ambulance bay. She was directed to the hospital's administration wing, a sterile, quiet part of the building that hummed with the low thrum of air conditioning. She needed a temporary parking pass, they said. She found herself standing before a large mahogany desk, behind which sat Mr. Harrison, the hospital's risk management administrator. He was a man in his 50s, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed shrink-wrapped to his lean frame. He had thin lips, cold eyes, and a palpable aura of disdain. He looked at Maya's blood-flecked jeans and t-shirt as if she were a piece of filth that had wandered in off the street. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a dry rustle of paper. Maya explained her situation, her voice small in the cavernous office. She just needed a place to park her van for a little while, until she could figure out what to do. Harrison listened, his face impassive. When she was finished, he steepled his fingers and stared at her for a long moment. "Miss Evans, let me be perfectly clear," he began, his tone dripping with condescension. "Your vehicle is no longer just a van. It has been exposed to a significant quantity of biomedical material. It is, for all legal and practical purposes, a biohazard." Maya's blood ran cold. "A? What?" "A biohazard," he repeated slowly, as if she were hard of hearing. "As such, it presents a significant liability to this institution. We cannot have it on our property. Per hospital policy and state health codes, it will have to be professionally decontaminated by our licensed, third-party vendor before it can be moved or operated on public roads." He slid a clipboard across the polished desk. It was an authorization form. Her eyes scanned the page, stopping at the bolded text at the bottom. Estimated cost for biohazard remediation. $4,500. A wave of dizziness washed over her. $4,500? I don't have that. I can't pay that. A flicker of something not pity but a cold, reptilian satisfaction crossed Harrison's face. "That's unfortunate," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "But your personal financial situation doesn't alter hospital policy. Frankly, your reckless decision to use a private, unsanitized vehicle as an impromptu ambulance has created this problem. We are not responsible for the consequences of your actions. If you do not authorize the cleaning within 24 hours, the vehicle will be towed and impounded at your expense. The cleaning fee will be attached as a lien. Have a nice day." He turned his attention back to his computer, a clear dismissal. The second wall had just slammed down, and it was made of solid gold bricks she had no hope of climbing. She stumbled out of his office and collapsed into a hard plastic chair in the waiting room. Her world was tilting on its axis. She pulled out her phone and called her insurance company a desperate last hope. The hold music was an upbeat, infuriatingly cheerful pop song. When an agent finally picked up, Maya poured out the story, her voice cracking. The agent, a young woman named Brittany, was polite but firm. There were long pauses as she typed. "Okay, Mrs. Evans, I'm looking at your policy." I see. Okay, so the issue here is that the damager in this case, the contamination was not the result of a covered accident you were involved in. You voluntarily used your vehicle in a manner for which it is not insured, specifically for medical transport. Our policy has a specific exclusion for that. But it was an emergency, Maya cried, attracting a few stares from others in the waiting room. It's called the Good Samaritan Law, isn't it? The Good Samaritan Law protects you from being sued by the person you're helping, ma'am, Brittany explained, her voice taking on the rote quality of a script. It does not compel a private insurance company to cover costs incurred outside the scope of the policy. I'm very sorry, but the claim is denied. The third wall. Impenetrable and absolute. The system had found every loophole, every clause, every reason to say no. The next day, after a sleepless night in a cheap motel paid for with the last of her cash, Maya took a bus to the impound lot on the industrial outskirts of town. The place was a graveyard for cars, surrounded by a rusty chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A greasy, pot-bellied man with a cigarette dangling from his lips met her at the office. His name tag read, Jed. He smirked when she explained who she was. "Ah, the ambulance driver," he wheezed, a cloud of smoke puffing out with the words. "Yeah, I got your van. Got a lien on it, too. $4,500 for the hospital's cleanup, plus my tow fee. That's another $300, and $200 a day for storage. That starts ticking now. I just need to get my things out of it," Maya pleaded. "My clothes, my art supplies, everything I own is in there." Jed laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "Not how it works, sweetheart. Can't touch the vehicle till the lien's paid. Contamination risk, you know." He leaned forward, his breath sour. "Tell you what, $200, cash, and I'll look the other way while you grab a backpack's worth. That's me being generous." She had less than $50 to her name. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. Through the fence, she could see the Wanderer. It was parked in a far corner, cordoned off with yellow biohazard tape. It looked like a tomb. Her home, her art, her grandfather's photo on the dash, all of it, just a few 100 feet away, held hostage by a predatory stranger. Desperate, Maya made one last, foolish gamble. She called a local news station, thinking that if people heard her story, someone might help. A reporter named Brenda Vance met her at a coffee shop. Brenda was sharp, ambitious, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She listened to Maya's story, nodding sympathetically, her recorder on the table between them. Maya, naive and hopeful, told her everything. The segment aired that night at 6:00 p.m. The title, in bold, aggressive graphics, flashed on the screen. "Hero or Hindrance? Woman's actions at crash site spark controversy." Brenda Vance's voiceover was slick and ominous. They showed a picture of the wrecked cars, then cut to their interview with Officer Miller. "Following proper procedure is paramount in these situations," he said grimly. They cut to a medical expert Maya had never seen, who talked about the grave dangers of moving someone with a potential spinal injury. They showed a 10-second clip of Maya, looking distraught and emotional, her words edited to make her sound hysterical and naive. They never once mentioned that the official ambulance was over an hour away. The final betrayal was the online comments, scrolling at the bottom of the screen. "What an idiot," she probably paralyzed him. "Attention seeker, I hope the hospital sues her. She destroyed evidence and should be in jail." The fourth wall wasn't a wall, it was a public pillory. And Maya was locked in it, her good deed twisted into a weapon and used against her by a reporter hungry for clicks. The eviction notice felt like a final sentence. Maya sat on the floor of the motel room, the crumpled paper in her hand. She had nothing left. The money from the craft fair was gone. The engine fund was a distant memory. She had a court date for the tickets and a certified letter from Jed's Towing informing her that the Wanderer would be auctioned in 10 days to cover the fees, which had now swelled to over $7,000. The world had shrunk to the four walls of this room, and soon even that would be taken from her. She pulled the only possession she had left from her pocket, the faded photo of her grandfather. His smiling face, so full of pride and optimism, felt like a cruel joke. I tried, she whispered to the photograph, tears finally tracing paths through the grime on her cheeks. I tried to do what you taught me. I tried to do the right thing, and look where it got me. She had been brave, she had been compassionate, and she had been systematically, efficiently, and cruelly punished for it. The system hadn't just failed her, it had devoured her. Stripped of her home, her livelihood, her reputation, and her hope, Maya Evans had hit rock bottom. She closed her eyes, unaware that miles away, in the sterile quiet of a military hospital, the man whose life she had saved was finally opening his. Sergeant First Class Cole, Sarge Mitchell, awoke to a persistent beeping in the unfamiliar ceiling of a hospital room. His head throbbed, and his leg was encased in a complex web of metal and plaster, but he was alive. His wife, Sarah, was asleep in a chair by his bed, her hand clutching his. His commanding officer, Captain Eva Rostova, stood by the window, a cup of coffee in her hand. He cleared his throat, the sound a dry rasp. Sarah? Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with relief. Cole! Oh, thank God. After the initial tearful reunion and a brief professional update from Captain Rostova, Cole's foggy memory began to clear. He remembered the tire blowing, the horrifying lurch, the crush of metal, and then something else. A woman's face framed by dark hair, her eyes wide with determination. The smell of lavender, the feeling of being lifted. The woman, he said, his voice stronger now. The one with the painted van, the hawk on the side. What happened to her? Did anyone thank her? Sarah and Captain Rostova exchanged a look of uncertainty. The paramedics who brought you to Mercy said a civilian dropped you off, Rostova said. The transfer here was so fast we didn't get a name. The paperwork is a mess. Cole became agitated, trying to sit up. A mess? Captain, she saved my life. That ambulance was an hour out. I heard it on someone's phone before I passed out. If she hadn't, find her. We have to find her. The conversation was overheard. Standing just outside the door was the unit's first sergeant, a man who embodied the very concept of an NCO. First Sergeant Top Reyes was a career soldier, a man whose sharp eyes missed nothing and whose loyalty to his soldiers was absolute. The phrase, "saved my life," was all the trigger he needed. He gave a sharp nod to Captain Rostova and disappeared down the hall. For Top Reyes, this was no longer a civilian matter. This was a mission. His investigation was a thing of brutal efficiency. He didn't ask, he tasked. A call to a contact in the CHP got him the accident report within the hour. He saw Officer Miller's name and the citations issued to one Maya Evans. His eyes narrowed. A civilian saves one of his NCOs from bleeding out and gets a ticket for her trouble? A quick search of Maya's name brought up the local news story from Brenda Vance. He watched the 3-minute segment on his office computer, his face growing darker with every manipulative cut. He saw how they framed her, how they omitted the crucial context of the delayed emergency response. He read the vicious online comments. His jaw tightened until the muscles stood out in sharp relief. He slammed his laptop shut with a crack. "Son of a bitch," he muttered to the empty room. "They're crucifying her. For saving Cole." Bureaucracy was a language. Top Reyes spoke fluently. He could navigate its channels and exploit its weaknesses better than anyone. But injustice, especially against a civilian who had demonstrated the kind of courage he respected, that was a declaration of war. The story spread through the base like wildfire. Reyes briefed Captain Rostova, who in turn briefed the battalion commander. Reyes himself, in his morning formation with Cole's platoon, laid out the situation in stark, simple terms. SFC Mitchell is alive today because a civilian woman sacrificed her Homia van she lived in to get him to a hospital. For this, she has lost her van, she is being fined, and she is being dragged through the mud by the media. This will not stand. The reaction was visceral. These soldiers, a family forged in the crucible of shared hardship, were collectively outraged. In the mess hall, a young private first class, barely 20 years old, took off his patrol cap, dropped a crumpled $20 bill into it, and started passing it around. "For the van lady," he said. The cap was filled in minutes. It wasn't charity, it was a counteroffensive. The news reached the highest levels of the base command. Colonel Jennings, a stern, formidable man with an eagle stare, listened to the full brief from Captain Rostova. He watched the news story on his own monitor, his face an unreadable mask of granite. When it was over, he swiveled in his chair and made 2 quiet phone calls. The first was to the base's public affairs officer. "I want a crew ready to roll, and I want you to give a heads up to Channel 8, not Channel 3. Got it?" The second call was to an old friend, a vice president at a regional Ford dealership. "Frank," he said, his voice low, "I need a favor." A system had crushed Maya Evans, but she had unknowingly activated a different system, a far more powerful one, built not on liability and loopholes, but on a warrior's code of honor, loyalty, and leaving no one behind. And that system was now mobilizing for a full-scale assault. The knock on her motel room door was sharp and authoritative. Maya, in the process of stuffing her few belongings into her backpack, froze. It was probably the manager, coming to escort her out personally. She sighed and pulled the door open, ready for the final indignity. Standing before her was not the manager. It was a man who seemed carved from granite, his uniform so crisp it could cut paper. His gaze was intense but not unkind. "Ms. Maya Evans?" he asked, his voice a low rumble of command. "I'm First Sergeant Reyes. Sergeant Cole Mitchell asked me to find you. He sends his deepest gratitude." The formality, the respect in his tone, was so alien to what she had experienced that she could only stare. He held out a thick, unsealed envelope. "A collection," he said simply, "from the men and women of the 4th Infantry Division at Fort Carson. It should be enough to take care of your immediate problems." Her trembling hands took the envelope. She opened it. It was filled with cash 20s, 50s, hundreds. Far more than enough to settle the fines, the fees, everything. The dam of her composure, cracked and strained for 2 weeks, finally broke. She leaned against the doorframe and sobbed, a raw, ragged sound of disbelief and overwhelming relief. First Sergeant Reyes waited patiently, his posture unwavering. When her sobs subsided, he spoke again. "Ma'am, that's just the down payment. Colonel Jennings, the base commander, would like to thank you personally. We've arranged for transportation to the base." Maya wiped her eyes and looked past him into the parking lot. Transportation? She stepped outside and the world stopped. Lined up down the length of the dreary motel street, gleaming in the morning sun, was a military convoy. A dozen Humvees and light tactical vehicles sat idling, a display of quiet, immense power. And standing in perfect, silent formation on the cracked asphalt were 200 soldiers in their impeccable dress uniforms. As she emerged from the doorway, First Sergeant Reyes barked a single command. "Atten, T-I-own!" 200 pairs of boots slammed onto the pavement in a single, thunderous sound that shook the very air. 200 spines straightened, 200 heads snapped forward. The sheer force of it, the absolute unity, was the most breathtaking thing Maya had ever seen. The minimalist piano score of her life had just been replaced by a symphony orchestra. Captain Rostova stepped forward and opened the door to the lead Humvee. "Ms. Evans," she said with a small, genuine smile. "If you would." The convoy pulled out, a presidential-level escort for one civilian woman in a worn-out sweater. People poured out of their shops and homes to stare, their phones held high to capture the impossible sight. The convoy did not take the direct route to the fort. It had several stops to make on its tour of justice. First, it rolled slowly, deliberately, past the local CHP barracks. Officer Miller was outside, talking to another trooper, and his jaw went slack as the procession passed. He saw Maya in the lead vehicle, looking out the window, and his face went pale. In the command vehicle behind hers, Colonel Jennings caught Miller's eye and gave him a slow, deliberate, and deeply disappointed shake of his head. It was a silent, career-ending rebuke. The next stop was Jed's towing. The convoy didn't just pass by, it pulled up and blocked the entrance. The sight of multiple military vehicles and the towering figure of First Sergeant Reyes striding into his greasy office made Jed literally shrink behind his desk. Reyes didn't bargain. He didn't threaten. He slapped a stack of cash on the counter, the exact, fair market price for the towing and storage, not a penny more. "You will release the vehicle to us. Now," he commanded. Jed, stammering and sweating, could only nod and fumble for the keys. Soldiers, moving with practiced efficiency, hooked the Wanderer to a recovery truck. The final stop was Mercy General Hospital. As they pulled up, a news van from Channel 8 Brenda Vance's rival station was already in position, tipped off by the base's public affairs officer. Colonel Jennings himself, flanked by Captain Rostova, strode into the gleaming lobby. He didn't ask for the risk manager, he asked for the hospital's CEO. On camera, Jennings delivered a masterclass in strategic maneuvering. He publicly, effusively praised Maya's heroic and decisive actions, calling her a model citizen. Then, he announced a new, multi-million-dollar Veterans Care Partnership between Fort Carson and the hospital, a program that would bring prestige and significant funding. He finished by saying the partnership was, of course, contingent on the hospital demonstrating a renewed and steadfast commitment to compassionate, community-focused administration. In the background of the shot, seen just over the colonel's shoulder, stood Mr. Harrison, his smug confidence gone, replaced by the ashen terror of a man watching his career evaporate on live television. The convoy finally arrived at Fort Carson. A massive, digitally printed banner hung over the main gate. "Welcome, Maya Evans, an American hero." She was greeted by applause. She was finally introduced to a recovering, emotional Sergeant Cole Mitchell, who held her hand and, with tears in his eyes, simply said, "Thank you. You saved my life. You saved me for my family." His wife and 2 young children hugged her, their gratitude a warm, healing balm on her bruised spirit. In a formal ceremony on the parade ground, Colonel Jennings presented Maya with the Commander's Award for Public Service. "In a world that increasingly asks, 'What's in it for me?'" Ms. Evans asked, "How can I help?" Jennings' voice boomed across the field. She upheld the highest values of this nation, and for that, she was punished by the very systems that should have supported her. Let this be a lesson. The uniform does not have a monopoly on service or sacrifice. We take care of our own, and today, Maya Evans is one of our own. A month later, the sun was warm on Maya's face. She stood in a prime spot at the state's largest arts festival. Next to her was a brand new, gleaming Ford Transit van. The side was adorned with a breathtaking mural, a professionally airbrushed masterpiece that was an evolution of her original design. A magnificent hawk, its wings spread wide, soaring over a panorama of the Sierra Nevadas. A small, tasteful brass plaque was affixed near the door. It read, "The Wanderer II, gifted with gratitude by the men and women of Fort Carson and community partners." Her old van, her beloved Wanderer, had been meticulously restored by the mechanics in the base's motor pool. They had decontaminated and repaired it, good as new, and with Maya's blessing, it was donated to a local charity for homeless veterans. The colonel and her new friends at the fort had insisted she deserved a fresh start. Her new van was a dream, its interior professionally outfitted as a state-of-the-art mobile art studio and storefront. Business was booming. Her story, the real story, had become a local legend. Customers flocked to her, not just to buy her art, but to shake her hand. She glanced at her new dashboard. Her grandfather's photo was there, now housed in a polished silver frame gifted to her by Sergeant Cole's wife. She reached out and gently touched the glass, a smile spreading across her face, a real smile, one that reached her eyes and filled them with light. Sometimes, the cost of doing the right thing is everything you have. But sometimes, in the face of overwhelming darkness, a single act of courage can be a beacon, a call to arms. A reminder that in a world of rules and regulations, there is still a place for righteousness. And that for every heartless system, there is a family, an army, a community, waiting to answer the call. Maya Evans looked out at the bustling crowd, her heart full, ready for the next mile.